Man, I can't wait to make a video about Stone Ocean once the part is finished. So, when's the next batch of episodes out? Wait, it's not till September? And we're still gonna have to wait for more? Are you fucking kidding me? This part's gonna take forever to finish! Shit, I need to find something else JoJo-related to cover in the meantime. Let's see, You! Hey guys, it's the Melblade 5, and one of the unexpected yet pleasant surprises to come this year was the announcement and subsequent release of the remaster to the JoJo fighting game All-Star Battle, All-Star Battle R. I was already somewhat familiar with the original All-Star Battle, along with some of the other JoJo games, but I didn't have the means to play many of them myself. The only one that was readily available to me was Eyes of Heaven. But after taking a look at its gameplay, I thought the combat looked very slow and mundane, so I didn't think I would enjoy it, and thus didn't buy it, leaving me wanting to rather play All-Star Battle between the two games developed by CyberConnect 2. So seeing R's announcement was almost like those subconscious prayers had been answered, along with how this wasn't going to be just a simple remaster, but an updated version with changes and entirely new content as well. It was even better than what I could have hoped for. I was super optimistic, but still erred on the side of caution initially since I had several huge fears for how it could turn out. But thankfully, none of those fears came true. And though there were a few other things about the game revealed later that I wasn't the biggest fan of, which I'll get into later, I ended up being overall more optimistic about than when it was revealed and when I played the demo. So I ended up purchasing the Digital Deluxe Edition. Why they didn't have a physical deluxe edition, I don't know, when I would have preferred that, but it is what it is. So while we have to wait for more Stone Ocean once again, let's take a short detour to look at my thoughts on this bizarre game after finally getting to play it myself. Man, that is a lot of copyrights. Fuck! At its core, All-Star Battle is a 3D fighting game featuring characters from all 8 parts that currently exist, including a guest appearance by Bao, the protagonist of Araki's previous manga. Just the in-series crossover aspect of this game was enough to engage interest out of me. Every part I've experienced so far through the anime has had a great cast of characters, so being able to see many of them who never met each other interact and fight using their crazy abilities, along with the prospects of the many dream matches you could make with them, was really cool. With the sheer variety of characters beyond just having all the parts further adding to that appeal. We have the JoJo's, villains, allies, and even some minor antagonists. You name it, they've probably covered it. And for R, on top of including all the original's DLC characters from the get-go, its biggest new feature is the addition of 10 new characters, most of whom are already newcomers in Eyes of Heaven. They are Speedwagon, Mariah, Pet Shop, Part 4 Jotaro, Okay, Yukiko, Trish, Prosciutto and Pesci and Ghiaccio? I would have much preferred Risotto over a Hitman team character. Anyway, Foo Fighters and Diego. All in all, I'd say this is a pretty good roster of 51 characters. Even though I do think a few of the newcomer choices are weird when getting in over other, more important characters. Like, where the hell is Weather Report? Aside from there. I'm also bummed that they didn't bring over Stroheim from Eyes of Heaven either. Plus, even I think that Part 5 getting 3 newcomers is too much. But the biggest of all for most people is how there's still only one JoJolian character. And they didn't update Gappy's moveset to include anything he does later in the parts, so he's still only based on the first few chapters. They said this was done so as to broaden the appeal for both manga readers and anime onlys by not spoiling it for the latter. I understand where they're coming from, but as an anime only when it comes to the main parts who has largely ignored looking at JoJolian stuff to save for when it gets animated in 2037, I disagree with this reasoning. Cause there are already spoilers for Steel Ball Run here, so I don't see why it should stop you now when it comes to the unanimated parts. JoJolian definitely deserves another character, and there's gotta be somebody in the part who is important, has good moveset potential, and isn't inherently a spoiler for you to include. Again, I think it's a good base roster overall, It just could have been a bit better with what they added this time around. Hopefully this game's DLC characters can improve on that point, preferably with a combination of characters I want and think should be here. But for how all these characters actually play under the game's mechanics, unlike Eyes of Heaven, All-Star Battle uses a traditional fighting game setup that I find more preferable for gameplay. It's akin to other 3D fighting games like Tekken, complete with its own Rage Mode copy. Though I don't think this is quite as high level per se as those games, mainly because each character's moveset have commands that feel a lot easier to pull off for the most part. I frankly suck at fighting games, and even I was able to execute some decent combos with the majority of characters I've played as so far. It works out well for me, so it's not really a complaint, but I can imagine the hardcore competitive players wanting that part to be more difficult. Though I noticed there are a lot of counters in this game, and I still suck at using those. Yet there are additional mechanics that give this game more of its own identity beyond the IP, which also lean into the fun absurdity that I love about JoJo. Each character is given a battle style, and depending on the style, it gives the character different techniques and effects. For example, the vast majority of the cast are stand users, in which most of them can switch between having their stand out or not for different special moves, which pretty much includes a stand rush for the humanoid ones. Even Grateful Dead. How does that work? R also added an assist mechanic where you call in another character to perform an attack like Marvel vs. Capcom, which adds a tiny bit more depth to the combat, and they fixed every issue I had with it from the demo. There, everyone used it to interrupt their opponent's combos, which resulted in them running out very fast. But here they have a separate limit on how many times they can be used for a combo breaker, with those limits also being changed to per round rather than the entire match to make it feel less like an afterthought now. On the stage side of things, each stage has an optional gimmick that can mix things up a little if you want a purely for fun match, with most of them involving some kind of hazard. And I guess the last noticeable area on this exact subject would be the super meter. On its own, it's nothing new for a fighting game, but here it has some interesting interactivity. Not only are there quite a few more moves that specifically use the meter to activate than what you usually see, but there are also moves that affect your opponent's meter, such as taunting when you knock them down, decreasing it. They made taunting a viable battle strategy. And of course, there's the typical super moves, or heart heat attacks and great heat attacks as they're called here, with the latter doing so much damage in this version. Most of them deal at least 50% max health when used at a full meter. Even Speedwagon does a ton of damage! All this together plays a part in making the combat feel so much fun to play in my opinion. On top of simply how the characters have so many fun moves to use, which still applies to the newcomers too. But on that subject, it takes me to another issue I had with the demo, being how, back then, I found the movesets to be pretty small. Maybe I've just been spoiled by other fighting games I've played, but while they do cover most, if not all, of what each character can do in the series, I was still left with a feeling of, that's it, when looking through the move list when training. Now my thoughts on this definitely improved when playing the full game, primarily due to the aforementioned number of stand users and switching between sets of specials, thus giving them slightly bigger movesets in total, alongside other styles that also toggle between two states for that same effect. As well as how a few non-stand users, and those whose stands are always active, were either given expanded movesets or extra tricks up their sleeves to compensate. So it wasn't as much of an issue as I had feared, but there are still a couple of characters, like Koichi and Anasui, where I feel they could have been given a little more than what they got. Also coupled with several weird implementations of certain characters. While this was also the case in the original, I still find it odd that they made Kira and Kira's Kosaku separate characters. I know they have different movesets, but personally if I was designing this game, I would have given Kira everything and made the two alternate costumes. But maybe I'm the weird one here. The same applies to the soon-to-be two Poochies. Though in that case, I guess it was another instance of wanting to avoid spoilers that probably wouldn't even be spoilers by now if Part 6 had just released weekly. Outside of the standard versus matches, among the other modes include the new All-Star Battle mode, replacing the story mode from the original, which was essentially each then finished part explained through text that was broken up by fights with several conditions tacked on. This takes those same kinds of fights and arranges them in more of a challenge mode setup, which I think is a much better execution and a little more fleshed out, even though it is still quite basic. More of the challenge I found of it so far comes from the CPU difficulty rather than the conditions. And even then, you can use in-game gold to pay for additional effects to make it easier. I found that if you use a combination of the Kraftwerk, Grateful Dead, and Highway Star effects, then you pay to win no problem on the hardest ones. I don't care, I just want the rewards without much hassle. Which in this version is things like costumes and content for the gallery since everyone is unlocked from the start. Aside from that, the only single player mode is Arcade, which as you'd expect has you fight in a series of matches as the same character. It's probably the best way to grind for gold, but I wish there was more to it. Such as having a final boss at the end rather than a random character on a higher difficulty. Like, a tougher version of Dio would certainly suffice. In the end, it's very little single player content, but as I've played some games with less, I'm a little forgiving. Not completely excusing it because it could have been better, but I've frankly seen worse. So that would make anybody move over to the online where... oh boy. The biggest criticism of this game that came from the demo is the online being bad. Honestly, when I played online in the demo, I only had one match that suffered from connection issues, and only for a brief period. But I can't deny seeing videos of other people having way worse issues than what I experienced. Admittedly, I haven't tried online in the full game myself, because I'm almost always too scared to go online in fighting games, since I just get destroyed by people way better than me to the point I might as well be a punching bag. Especially since all my losses will be displayed to the entire world. The only reason I went online in the demo was because it was the only mode it had other than training. And I only won once after many losses. But once again, looking at videos of others online, most of the time it doesn't look as bad, but there are still cases of it being really bad. And I've heard there's some input lag too, which wouldn't surprise me. Why they just didn't use rollback netcode is beyond me, and it's a shame that this will probably bog down a really fun game for those who mainly play fighters online. Conversely, for the last aspect of this game I wanted to talk about, and the biggest, most fun aspect that is on par with the gameplay, the fan service. And I'm not just talking about Mariah's bolt bra attack. I'm talking about all the references to the series they included along with other fun details. Beyond how much of the characters' attacks and abilities shown in their fights they managed to squeeze in their movesets, minus Gappy, they included many of the poses in their victory animations. There are tons of unique interactions between characters, for those who appear in the same part, and even those who don't, where they play off of some kind of theme for fun what-if scenarios. Each stage having a dramatic finish that reenacts events that happened there in the series, Joseph predicting everyone's lines, everyone having an insult for Josuke's hair, including Josuke himself? Mr. losing some of his super meter upon getting hit when he has 4 bullets left. All the alternate colors and costumes being those they have worn from across all manner of sources, though there are still some I'm shocked they didn't include. Even references to things that are manga only, I still get. And the deepest cut of them all, the Purple Haze feedback references. Seeing Purple Haze distortion in action is the closest we'll get to an OVA. I could go on for ages about all the little details, Easter eggs, and homages that made me go,
I understood that reference.
But you get the idea by now. CyberConnect 2 going to this much effort to add all this gives me the same feeling I have with David Production adapting for the anime, of getting the impression that they genuinely care about the source material and showing it in their work when it comes to this aspect. Which shouldn't be too much of a surprise since JoJo has always been huge in Japan, but it's still nice to see. Supported further by how they improved the subtitles in this version. The original had some really bad and inaccurate subtitles at times that were especially apparent when you knew what moments were being referenced. Most notably in Jolene's heart heat attack. That is definitely not what she's saying, considering what she actually says in the Marilyn Manson fight. And the subtitles themselves sound like a shit attempt at a joke. But thankfully this time, they corrected it. Along with a couple of the other ones too. It's not much in the grand scheme of things, but I very much appreciate it. A bit weird having the last thing I talk about be subtitles of all things, but that's everything I wanted to say. While All-Star Battle R isn't perfect due to a few prevalent issues, namely the online, its positives and just how much fun it is to play largely overshadows those issues in my eyes. But that opinion could easily differ from person to person. If you're not a JoJo fan, and or someone who's really invested in the competitive side of fighting games, then this probably won't do much for you. But if you're like me, who doesn't fit either criterion, then I would recommend checking it out. The crazy shit you can do when you find a character you're good with, combined with all the fan service, is almost like the greatest high. When luck is on my side, it's genuinely one of the biggest blasts I've had with a fighting game already. But there could be a little bias clouding my judgment on that statement. Just thinking about all those dream matches I can do is enough to get me excited. Like Time Stop versus Time Erase, the Whole Horse versus Mr. Gunfight, and throw Foo Fighters in there, and the ice fight no one asked for. Watch Gacho punch a bird! With all this, I avidly wait to see what becomes of and comes to this game in the future, if the online doesn't kill it. And on that note, I shall let the Joestars return to facing their greatest foe yet. American anime companies.
You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.